presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
This is Dialogue Assassination with political research specialist Mae Brussell and guest today, Bob Cutler, East Coast assassination researcher. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
And Mae, again, welcome back.
Let's
get right into things. What's the, well, you want to, like we usually do, try and explain briefly what Dialogue Assassination is about?
No.
You hit me with it last week.
I hit you with it last week. You want me to do it this week?
Yes.
Dialogue Assassination is a program that tries to keep interest regenerated or renewed or started into the political assassinations in the United States. I believe that the assassination of Senator John Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King were conspiracies, and I believe they're not dead issues. We go on there every week, take the news of the week, current guests that our researchers visit us, and we show how the news of this week is affected by the past political assassinations. And we have a guest from the East Coast from Massachusetts. I've referred to his book and his work on the East Coast. We've been corresponding for a long time, and Mr. Cutler, Bob Cutler, is here today to talk about his research at the other end of the country over in Massachusetts. It's a long way away, but we see a lot of things in common, don't we?
That's an awful lot to have to cover, I have to say so.
Yes, there's a lot of ground there. Well, I promised this week that we would get into the Chappaquiddick affair because it's current with the elections coming up, a lot of talk of Ted Kennedy in the news. Briefly, let's just mention this book again that you did, Two Flight Paths, because I've talked about this, and I have not talked about it on the air on a whole program, but I have mentioned it. You have a book called Two Flight Paths, Evidence of Conspiracy. Do you want to explain what the flight paths are that you're writing about there?
I think I can do that. The first flight path is the path of the bullet that was supposed to have gone through the president's neck, through the governor's chest, through the governor's wrist. Part of it was lodged in his left thigh, and it was found about 45 minutes later, 3 miles away, on a stretcher in the hospital.
This is Governor John Connally.
That's Governor John Connally, now
Yes.
Secretary of the Treasury,
Yes.
as you all know. This bullet became rather famous, and its name now is CE 399, which is merely Commission Exhibit 399. It was accepted as evidence during one of the commission hearings. And as a result of that, it became necessary to make this bullet the cardinal issue, let's say, of the Warren Report, the very basis of the Warren Report, because without that one bullet going through two people in the motorcade, the president and Governor Connally, it was impossible to allow or permit or even think of the lone assassin theory. This is the real reason why we talk about Commission Exhibit 399.
Yeah, I think we should explain that Oswald's rifle couldn't do. There was a time span that with which he could get a certain amount of bullets out.
Exactly. And couldn't fire it that fast.
He couldn't fire. And the movies...
Nobody could, as a matter of fact, let alone Oswald.
Yeah, but in the movies they reconstructed the time period from when the president was first shot until he was killed. And it was impossible to get out more than 3 bullets, if that many, in that particular time period.
6.8.
So if there were more than 3 bullets anywhere, then Oswald was not the lone assassin, and there was a conspiracy.
That's right.
So
one bullet had to do many more things than is possible to do for one bullet.
That's right.
But isn't the argument that Oswald was the lone assassin, isn't the argument substantiated by the fact that they say he was an expert and that he could have fired them that quickly? The argument has already been brought forth that somebody could have fired that quickly, and you're saying that
you could have, but there was no hit time. There was no aim time. That's what I mean. In other words, it takes a little bit of time to aim in between. The only way that anybody could actually get 3 shots out in 6.8 seconds was to just merely work the rifle and the trigger, work the bolt and the trigger, bam, bam, bam. No aim at all, no thinking about it, just doing it mechanically.
And even besides the flight paths, the impossibility of doing all the bullets said, there was no proof, and this is another subject, that Oswald even owned a rifle.
That's very true.
Or that it ever came to him. Or that it ever came to him. So therefore,
Right.
the reconstructing of Bullet 399 becomes very important on how the Commission reevaluates their evidence to make the story fit.
Oh, yes, they certainly did. This is called the single bullet theory. And the interesting part, if you take it from the standpoint of one who, I'm used to drawings, because being in the architectural business, that's what you're used to. So if you can put the limousine on the street in the right place, and you can put Oswald in the window, supposedly in the assassin's nest, you should be able to draw a line from that window through the president and then through Governor Connolly, because it's very clear in the report that the bullet was not deflected by anything in the president's neck. It did not hit any bone. That's a whole other story. Yeah. And the two things do not work. It doesn't work in plan. It doesn't work in elevation. The angles are incorrect. The two men were not lined up so that this could happen. And as a result, the whole single bullet theory becomes a figment of the imagination. It's our inspector's imagination, very active.
It's a good thing to write a book on just one subject, the bullet, that you've done. I'm going to do one book on just evidence destroyed, physical evidence that was destroyed in restructuring this particular crime that they had to do in order to say Oswald committed the murder. And if you understand evidence destroyed, then it pertains to like the ITT memo where they pulverize everything in the office. This is why the current news of this week is, if you understand the past, you understand the present. When they want Mrs. Beard's office, it helps to understand when you can go in and take everything and shred it and pulverize it. And then, again, this morning's news, they produced a memo that was the authentic one, but it was written by some other woman and not Mrs. Beard. And I put this under delayed evidence. If you understand the John Kennedy material, like the bullet, like you've done, any piece of evidence, you can understand what's happening. The news becomes very easy to read because people know something is wrong. We know specifically what is wrong and how they handle evidence. Now, this book, your address is 38 Union Street, Manchester, Massachusetts. If you care to get this book, 2 flight paths, this is the address, Cutler Designs, 38 Union Street, Manchester, Massachusetts, 01944. It's $7. That is not an unfair price for all the research that people think, that these books are expensive today. They're worth every cent. I know everybody who has bought the books I've recommended, we're glad to have them and bought more.
Could I say just one thing about the second flight path, because it is important. As you're looking into the single bullet theory and trying to find out what happened to CE 399, it became evident that if you could take and look backwards through the governor's chest and extend a flight path backwards towards where the actual bullet that went through the governor actually came from, and that is the second flight path. If you do that, you have to set the governor just in the right position and put him in the limousine on Elm Street, and then look backwards through his chest, and what happens is that you come out in plan and in elevation. That means in the vertical angle and in the horizontal angle. You come out on the 6th floor of the TSBD, the Texas School Book Depository Building, but you do not come out at the window where the Warrant Commission says there was a rifle. You come out at a window much further west, about 8 or 9 windows further down along, away from the tree that blocked the path of the CE-99 until such and such a frame. In other words, the 2 flight paths are evidence of conspiracy in that one of them is an absolute fake, is a negative, whereas the other is a positive.
And also, along those lines, there was a German Mauser in the building, and the first weapon found was a German Mauser for 24 hours.
And attested to.
Yes, and that...
By Weitzman.
And Oswald mentioned seeing that rifle in the building. He was angry. That's one of the things that he spoke about. The German Mauser was found in the repository, and all the law enforcement agencies said it was a German Mauser holding this gun. Mark Lane's written that up at length. Well, now I think we'll go on to the bridge at Chappaquiddick, because that is in the news. There's cartoons this week and everywhere about Ted Kennedy. Is he going to run? And what happened at Chappaquiddick? This was in 1969, July 1969. and everybody assumed that it was a very simple affair. He was caught with a girl, an accident happened, they had some drinks, at the end of it, maybe he shouldn't run if he behaves in this manner, and Ted Kennedy was put in his proper place, so-called, by the people that wanted to have him removed as an electoral candidate, I believe. The Chappaquiddick, don't you think that was the purpose of his dunking? I call it the dunking, just to get him out of the 72 elections?
Yes, to make it so that he would be, it would be very... Nobody would want to have somebody for president who had been ostensibly been drinking and then carousing around with a girl, trying to go to the beach with her, and then he doesn't know how to handle himself when he finally gets into an accident.
Then he lies about it besides.
And that came out later, right.
And doesn't report it, and who would want him for the president? That's the way the editorial
This is really, and this is really exactly what was planned, I think, and it came out very well. I think they did a very, very good job, whoever did it.
Yeah, they being who?
We don't
speculate?
Have absolutely no idea.
Well, I speculate.
I have no idea, let's put it that way.
I think that the way you speculate is you begin with the law enforcement agencies, that when you have a murder or a death, this particular girl was dead and for 10 hours, and all of her friends and buddies didn't discuss with each other, didn't come back and tell the group at the party she was dead, and the senator goes home and goes to sleep, gets up and has a healthy breakfast, and nobody knows anything is wrong. The way the information lined up, the chief of police, to begin with, in the area is responsible, and the doctor just says it's simple drowning. But at the same time, they quickly flew every witness out of town and never cross-examined them or did an autopsy. So I think the responsibility lies with the law enforcement agencies all the way up to the top. I know you don't agree with me at this part, Bob, but I think that when you want to find out how somebody was killed, you can find out, or you can ask a lot of questions and begin to want to know, but there's no desire to find out. And even when the judge had the inquest, the remark he made was, "I know you're all lying." What were his exact words to this? "You're lying through your teeth"? He stepped Judge Boyle.
I don't really remember that.
He made a remark that he was retiring at that point, but that he knew that everybody was lying through their teeth, that they weren't telling the truth at the inquest.
Well, certainly in the end of his statement, he certainly questioned the fact that whether Kennedy was really responsible for what he had said.
That's right. And people, when Kennedy was on the television program, I have many, many articles. I saved them all, and all over the country, they believe, well, this isn't the truth.
No.
So the law enforcement agency, you see, you can tell an untruth, like you'd say, "Where were you last night?" And it was at Carnegie Hall or at Mary's apartment. That is a variable of truth. But when a person is dead and involved, you can't just take it as a flippant thing like, well, I guess we'll never know.
But what you have to do is look at it, let's say, for the way I was looking at it. Well, we were right, I lived near the island, and when the news came out, most people realized it was just a simple accident, an automobile accident, and incidentally, there was a fatality connected with it. Now, there are accidents every day, and automobile accidents all happen all the time, and fatalities are connected with them. Now, unless you are trained or geared to looking for something, it doesn't become evident to you right then and there that there is foul play.
Well, I realize what you're saying.
This is the problem, I
think. The
think.
weekend of that particular accident, Meyer Zellick was in my home, and we were talking, and he did 6 years of research on a book called Friendship and Fratricide, on the framing of Alger Hiss by Whittaker Chambers.
Yeah.
And he's a psychiatrist in San Francisco, has a home in Carmel Valley. And, of course, he said to me, very quite flippantly, "Oh, get off of it, May. It couldn't be a conspiracy. They were drinking. It was a girly party." I said, "You've spent 6 years seeking out planted evidence on Alger Hiss, and you take for granted that they wouldn't do it to Ted Kennedy.
The thing you shouldn't take for granted is the fact that it's Kennedy.
Well,
this is the biggest single item.
But the whole thing is that 2 of Ted Kennedy's brothers have been murdered, and coming home from Alaska just shortly before this mishap, he said they were going to get him.
Right.
And Ted Kennedy, by all polls, even in '69, had made the decision that he would be the contender that Richard Nixon would have to face in '72.
It certainly seemed that this is exactly the time that he had made it, and that's when they stopped him, rather than kill him.
And so the best way to discredit him or put him aside and let him get the message, because you wouldn't want to kill the three Kennedys would be to kill this particular girl and make it look like he was negligent.
Right. Do you think, Mae, that, or Bob, that the plan to, if it was a plan to discredit the senator, relied upon his not being able to handle the situation, or would this plan have succeeded had the senator reported it right away, had been available right away, not had this haze over him, or was that part of the plan?
Yeah, we talked about it. We know that if he told, he would be killed. You know, we talked about this. The book that you're doing, what your theory is about why he couldn't speak up.
Well, I think he's scared. I think it produced, again, the plan, whatever it was. And however they wanted to have it come out, the overall objective was to scare him and allow him to keep himself in the Senate, let's say. Okay, you can stay in the Senate, but the minute you jump out of the Senate and start running for the presidency, we will take care of you, the way we did with your two brothers. I mean, somebody must have put it in language that was abundantly clear. And whether he got the message directly or whether he got it indirectly, because he did not know anything about what had happened to him until 8 o'clock the next morning. Oh. I'm convinced of that.
Do you think he was driving the car?
No, he was not driving the car.
How can you say that? I mean, I want to see something behind that.
All right. If you'll let me just quote from Inquest, I think I can...
Inquest is an inquiry that took place in Massachusetts on this particular accident. There was really no cross-examination of any kind, was there? Each witness spoke up. And,
right. There was no cross-examination. There's never been any cross-examination. Doesn't seem to have been any cross-examination in any of the investigations of the Kennedy murders. On the basis of my past research and reading, I had called Massachusetts and said, fingerprint the steering wheel, he was not driving the car. And this was from Carmel, California, and Bob Cutler's from Massachusetts. He believes Ted Kennedy was not driving the car because we have a lot of information would make us think that he was framed, that his car was pushed into the water and that he was not in it at all. Right. And Bob Olson did a book called Bridget Chappaquiddick where he says emphatically he was not driving the car. This is based upon a lot of things that are put together. In the first place, nobody ever saw Senator Kennedy in wet clothing of any kind. Wet hair, wet clothing. He went back to the cottage. He was supposed to have gotten help. His cousins were there. They didn't see him wet. He went back to the inn and to his room, changed his clothes. There was no discussion of wet clothing in his room or seeing him approach the inn. It was a small inn. The man who was there was awake at night. He came down and asked him the time. Were there 8 rooms at that inn? You can read that PG testimony. It was something like that.
3 upstairs, 3 down, and then
I couldn't. Mr. Peachy didn't want to talk to me very much.
Mr. Peachy was at the desk, and
he was the innkeeper. He was the co-owner.
He was awake when the senator came down, and he didn't even recognize the senator. He didn't know who he was. But as far as driving the car, I had just finished reading a chapter on Otto John, the German who was very anti-Nazi and was in on a plan to kill Hitler. His family was all murdered because of this plan. He opposed Hitler. Can you find that chapter?
No, I can't find that, actually.
Yeah, right, but Otto John was the story of a man who came back to Germany to reconstruct Germany after the war, and he was opposed by Adenauer and by Reinhard Gehlen, General Reinhard Gehlen, who was chief of intelligence, reconstructing German intelligence with the CIA and Richard Helms, and they didn't appreciate Otto John disclosing who the former Nazis were, and he was warned when he left England and went back to Germany, they will get you, the Nazis will get you, because if you talk too much, and they will remember that you were anti-Nazi before the war, and they're restructuring the Nazis, and Otto John was warned, don't go back to Germany. But he was kidnapped and given some coffee and fell asleep, and he was taken to East Germany and then made totally discredited, went on the television, told the people in Germany that he was a communist. And the story, it's in The Secret War for Europe by James Hogan. It's a marvelous chapter. And I had just finished reading the discrediting of Otto John shortly before the Chappaquiddick affair, and I felt that Ted Kennedy and Otto John had common enemies, Reinhard Gehlen and Richard Helms of the CIA. Why did you think, going back
to... Well, I think, yes, going back to that simple question, I think the most telling part, there are two things that are very important in assessing whether or not he was driving. Number one, he said that as soon as he found out what had happened that morning, he immediately went to the police. Now, that happens to be the time is around 20 minutes past 9, and that's really, he found out at 8 o'clock.
See, when he found out what happened, he went to the police.
This is, I think, a very telling point. Now, this means something to me. The other assessment of why he was not driving the car comes about through the fact that that morning he was up around 7:15 or so, 7:30, and went out, got a paper, got a little bit of breakfast, and met one of his friends against whom he'd been racing, went back up onto the porch outside his room in the hotel, was chatting, sitting there talking to a couple of other friends, and Mrs. Richards also was there, and just talking about the weather, talking about the time, talking about the races, and all these things, while actually you're supposed to now believe that at that precise moment he knew that he had been in an accident, that he had almost drowned, and that the reason there was a dead girl in his car was because he was negligent.
And he swam across the channel. How far was that?
500 yards. I mean, it's not 500 yards. It's nearer 500 feet, 100 yards roughly, something like
that's
that.
all, yeah.
He'd done all those things, but the main thing is that he was putting on all this front by talking about inconsequential trivia.
And nobody
he knew there was a dead girl in his car that hadn't been found. And furthermore, he was waiting for something else to happen. Now, this is absolutely impossible for a man of his upbringing, for almost any human being, unless you've been trained in a really police state, to do this kind of thing, to act in a completely double capacity.
Well, also, besides the way he acted, and you say, well, was he trained or programmed? The way he acted, there's just the physical part of getting out of the car. He said, I don't know how I got out of that car. The doors were closed. Right. The windows in the front, were they open? I don't remember.
The window next to him was wide open.
Wide open.
Yep.
But he said there was something about the doors that he thought he had opened a door, but he couldn't under the water pressure.
Right.
He has no way of knowing how he got out of that car.
And he never says.
No, and also, we'll go on to Mary Kopechnik next, who was in the car. But he didn't know how he got out, and his behavior was such that there was no indication of any way that he was aware of what happened until he went back to the island in the morning.
Right.
And the conversation, the effect, what did they say?
Well, Gargan and Markham came in and talked to him at 8 o'clock, and that's when he first found out what had happened to him.
And then he took the
And then they really had a bad time, because they've got to do something very quickly, because the more they delay, the more leaving the scene of a crime, and it is a crime then, or leaving the scene of an accident. I mean, you can make it into a crime if you make it into manslaughter, which was not done. But the time element then became extremely important, and they must have had a very difficult time trying to figure out what to do.
How to account for those 10 hours that passed.
Right.
Well, I think that, again, backing the Otto John, I did a lot of research and read, this information about the man who was with him, Mr. Crimmins, who served him a particular drink. I'm interested in how you take care of the food that evening or what was given to you, because Otto John's very, very close friend gave him a cup of coffee, and he became drowsy, and from then on, it was a whole trip to discredit his whole political career. He's in Germany now, but he can't have any office or do anything. Although he was renowned and a prominent conservative before the Hitler era, And, Mr. Kennedy was at the cottage, and he was given a rum and coke. In the inquest, they said, they asked Mr. Crimmins, who was his chauffeur, do you know whether Mr. Kennedy had anything to drink? And he said, I believe he had one drink when I saw him. And do you know what that was? Rum and Coca-Cola. How do you know this? Because I poured it for him at the time. Could you tell us what happened to the rum? He said, I poured some rum away from an open bottle. They drank some rum on Thursday night, and then this was Friday, and they poured some away. What is Kennedy's favorite drink? I'm not sure. Now, this is the man who served him for 9 years.
Oh, yeah.
And when they said to him, what is your profession? He said, legal aid and investigator. Mr. Kennedy referred to him as a chauffeur, but he gave the judge the answer, I'm a legal aid and investigator. Could you tell us what he threw the rum away? Is he disposed to rum and coke? I think he might be. Then he says, in the summertime. Well, this was the summer, and he served him 9 years. Why wouldn't he know? And why was it all thrown away and not tested, you see, for what the contents was? He was tired and said he wanted to go home and sleep. and he said he'd take Miss Kopechne back, that she wasn't feeling well. Now, this is 11:15, and these people are pretty sophisticated. They stay up a certain amount of hours, and there was this rumor under the title Gossip in Time magazine we were talking about last night that Mary Kopechne was drowsy at 11 and curled up in the back of a car. See, the unanswered questions, and we could go for many hours on those, make it necessary to open up the law enforcement proceedings on this particular case. Because there was a death, and we don't know whether he walked out with her, like he said, or whether she was drowsy.
There was no cross-examination. This is the real problem.
There was nothing.
There's nothing except what you can read in the printed word is the only thing we have now. That's the only record.
And then, again, you have the same problem that you have with the Warren Commission report or all these other, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, which has never been investigated. You have multiple witnesses that are involved who are never called. There's no court to question them.
Right.
The rundown of the people at the party, maybe we should just talk about those in a minute, because there were so many of them.
12.
Yeah, there were 12. And
12 people.
the important thing was that 2 of them were lawyers. They had prominent positions in Massachusetts.
Well, really 3, if you count the senator.
Yeah, and the story is that they waited, that Ted Kennedy could say to 2 of the other lawyers, don't tell anyone in the party that Mary Kopechne's dead, and we'll do it in the morning. This is what was supposed to have happened.
This is also the printed record.
The printed record. You don't think it happened?
I know. I'm sure it didn't happen. I'm convinced that nobody said, let's not tell anybody else. They were told not to tell anybody else.
Yeah, Gargan and Markham.
Gargan and Markham were told not to tell anybody else, and they didn't.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, Markham never got back into the cottage until around 4:30. He says between 4 and 4:30, he said he'd been asleep in the Valiant, which was the other car.
This situation, for those who aren't familiar with it, was a little summer cottage. You've seen it.
Yes.
A little tiny cottage. Was it got 2 rooms?
Yes.
And there were...
I think it's 2 bedrooms, as a matter of fact, a
and there
kitchen, living room.
5 girls and 6 gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you say...
6 and 6.
6
Everything was 6 and 6.
6 and 6.
Crimmins went to sleep. He was tired.
The chauffeur was tired and went...
Well, he was a much older man. He's about 62 or 3.
Well, that's...
And he decided that he would just go to sleep. That's his testimony.
Yeah, and he let the others do their thing.
Right.
Do you want to describe these particular people? And
Well, Crimmins was a chauffeur, and then La Rosa and Tretter were good friends. Ray La Rosa and Charlie Tretter were friends of the senator, and Gargan and Markham. Gargan's the senator's first cousin, and Markham is a old friend of his. I mean, they were there because of the political. It has been said that it was a political get-together. In other words, all the girls had been in the campaigns, particularly with Robert Kennedy, and some of them with the president, and they all knew Teddy. Yeah. And so this was a sort of get-together, and that's really all it was.
It was supposed to be just
right.
A loose thing. But by pairing them up, and Tretter and Mary Keogh go off, and by pairing them and going
Cricket.
Cricket Keogh. By splitting and going different directions, the suggestion is that it wasn't just a little political thing. So you have him in a compromising position right away.
Right away.
You have him doing, even if he goes there, and he says, "Well, I'll go meet all you other people." And come home at 11, even if it's the most innocent kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We constructed what we thought happened, and I think we should share it with the others in the sense that when Senator Kennedy was examined for any accidents, his first statement was he was in a state of shock, but his doctor said he had a concussion. And my personal feeling is that he was hit on the head. How about you?
He had two hits on the head.
2 hits on the head.
One behind his right mastoid and one on the top of his head.
Mm-hmm. Now, I feel that he could have left that house in the automobile and somebody could be sitting behind and give him a concussion and then take him and dunk him if they have to, but I don't think they had to. He could have even been drowsy from something he was served and be taken right to the hotel and told what happened or scared.
Or just knocked out
This is the way,
held there.
According to all the evidence and the lack of testimony and the way it was handled, and the things that I put together, he was given a concussion and held there and told, you stay here.
Right.
And he was not told that his car was going to be thrown over a bridge with a particular girl in it dead.
Right.
No. And then in the morning, the men come back and say, your car's in the water,
right.
and there's a body in it.
Right. And that's when they had a hard time figuring out what to do.
And how much to tell the wives and the press and the Senate and the President. And
I think Markham is responsible for deciding that the best thing that the senator could do was to plead guilty to a lesser charge and hope for the best, that he'd get out of the others, which is what happened.
Yeah. Because I feel that there's no way, if it was a conspiracy like the other murders that I talk about on this particular program, if this was a conspiracy to frame Ted Kennedy, you have to know the time and place and the milieu in which you can do it. And you have to be sure that the law enforcement people aren't going to prosecute or investigate. Because, you see, in Time magazine, we mentioned that last night, Mary Kopechny, there was a suggestion that she was drowsy and in the back of the car at 11 o'clock and that he didn't know she was in the back. All he had to do is get in the seat of his car and go back if the others are staying. If he sit on the head, he wouldn't even know, as we said before, that Mary's in there. But later, after it was well along its way and she was buried and the inquest was starting, it came out that she had blood on the black of her shirt. And where do you think this blood came from, that her garments were bloody after being... There was enough detected even after soaking in salt water 10 hours.
Let's get the answer to that after we break the station. You're listening to Dialogue Assassination on KLRB Carmel with Mae Brussell, the regular host of the program, the one who does the work every week. She's a research specialist here on the West Coast, and the guest today is Bob Cutler, who does similar work on the East Coast.
The question of the blood on Mary Kopechny's, Mary Jo's blouse is a very interesting one. There were 4 responsible men who saw that blouse prior to her body being shipped to Wilkes-Barre. The first was the scuba diver who took her out, got her back out of the car and brought her up to the surface. The second was the chief, who held her for a few moments in his arms before transferring her to the boat, which was then, her body was then moved over onto a police stretcher on the shore. The third would be the medical examiner, the doctor, associate medical examiner, Dr. Mills, who turned her over and saw no blood. None of these 3 men have seen blood on the blouse as of now, which is about 9:30. That is when he performed his examination. And the fourth is Fry, Eugene Fry, the mortician, who undressed the body and prepared it for shipment to Wilkes-Barre. Now, those 4 men, if any of them had seen blood on that blouse, it would have been obvious that they would have said something about it. It wasn't until about a couple of weeks later that in the state police lab, the chem lab, that the blouse was subjected to benzodrine test, and the blood was found very strongly on the back of the inside and the outside of the collar. It was a long-sleeve blouse. A great deal of the back showed residual traces of blood, is what the term is, and down both arms.
And wasn't there some suggestion even of a possible strangling, that they didn't investigate that?
The court record of the exhumation hearing, Denise brought that up 3 times.
Yeah, you see,
he thought that perhaps that blood might have come from strangulation, I think.
I think that it's very...
Again, this is opinion on my part.
Yeah, well, I think that it's very important when you've had so many tragedies in that particular family, and this last member of the family, the male, believes that they will get him, that you have to go for motives. And it would be very simple to do an autopsy. Well, it would be simple for me. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't allow it, whoever the they is. But Mary Kopechny should have been examined in the form of an autopsy to see, number one, if she was pregnant, because a lot of people would think she was expendable, maybe in the career of Senator Kennedy, or smearing him. I don't think he would put himself up to this, but you can't rule out motives in any particular murder. And also they should have gone into the belly for crystals to see if she was poisoned or drowsy.
Right.
If any foreign thing was in her stomach to make her drowsy. If the report in a simple thing like Time magazine picks up somewhere that she was drowsy in the back of the car at this hour and that he drove off and didn't know she was in the back, you have to see...
We don't know whether Time magazine picked it up or made it up.
We don't know, but I don't think, as long as they're publishing it for the world to see why it shouldn't be checked out, it's a simple ABC of criminology. to find out why, what was in her belly. I should think that every avenue should be explored, and particularly after the blood was noticed, to see
the
if
alcoholic content of the blood was almost to the level where she could have been termed legally intoxicated.
You see, it's very like in the killing of Officer Tippett, in order to have an excuse to arrest Oswald on some charge, there was no autopsy on Tippett, and you know he was sent to Parkland Hospital dead on arrival, and then he was sent to another hospital dead on arrival. Did you know he was sent to two hospitals?
No, I have not gotten into Officer Tippett's
Officer
death.
Tippett was dead in two different hospitals and dead on arrival at two places, and the autopsy wounds should have been discussed to see if, from the window where Oswald stood, if he actually killed Officer Tippett, because many witnesses saw two people do a crossfire and flee, and therefore any kind of rumor could easily be settled about whether Oswald killed Officer Tippett or not by doing an autopsy. There was none done. And to perpetuate, you begin to know a pattern. You see, like people back there accept these stories, or people out here accept these stories because they're not into the details of the other murders. You know, when we met, you said to me, how can you do work on Chappaquiddick in Carmel, California? How can you do your research so far away?
Right.
And I said, well, how can Mr. Justin in Germany write about every week from Germany? How can I call Denise and tell him to fingerprint the steering wheel he wasn't driving the car? It's easy, because if you've done enough research and cross-filed all the previous murders and assassinations in a systematic way, you come up with columns. It's like having a certain problem in arithmetic. How can you do this addition problem? Well, if you've done all the others, you can solve this one. Mm-hmm. The patterns are the same, and you know what to look for. And when you know that they don't look for it, that becomes a pattern too, and it begins to become more than gross negligence. Just like the restructuring of your bullet and your flight paths, the same mishandling of information that would be very simple in any other homicide isn't even scratched upon.
None of them have been, actually.
No. So we talk about Mary Kopechny with the blood on her blouse. What do you think?
And no other. The only other wound that she had was a small abrasion to one knuckle on her left hand. The fact that she went off supposedly in the death seat. As you know, the passenger's position in the front seat is supposed to be the most dangerous. She allegedly went off the bridge in the car, sitting in the front seat, passenger side.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, she did not go off the bridge sitting in the front seat, passenger side. She was in the back seat.
There was no way that she could have ever gone from the front to the back.
If you can consider that, upside down in the dark, you have to go over the top of the back seat, of the front seat. In order to do that, you have to dive, because the car was completely upside down.
Well, you had the feeling that the windows were smashed when the car was turned over, and
no, before.
Yeah. But you had the feeling that she could have been dead, and that they put her through that window if she wasn't in there before. Oh, you thought she was scratched by the glass?
She died of asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Not asphyxiation by immersion, which was the associate medical examiner's finding. He said that it was a simple drowning case. Drowning means asphyxiation by immersion.
Uh-huh.
She was found in a vertical position with her head way up into the air pocket in the footwell, with her nose and mouth up, pointing towards the top of the pond, which was only about 2 feet above her nose.
Where the air was.
Yeah. Where the air was trapped in the footwell of the car, which was upside down. Now, she died of asphyxiation, not by asphyxiation, by immersion. There's a very, very subtle difference here. And as a matter of fact, a great deal of the testimony at the exhumation hearing was between experts. Which was it? Was it asphyxiation by immersion, or was it asphyxiation? And they came out a draw.
Of course, they had to come to a draw, because if he had reported it earlier, she might have lived, and there was this problem,
That was the basic problem that they were fighting in the exhumation report.
Holding on to Kennedy's responsibility.
Exactly, because if they had proved that he should have, if they'd gotten there, if the scuba diver could have gotten there, let's say, within an hour of the time that car went off the bridge, it's very possible that she'd still be
And
alive.
the lights across the street and along the way were on, and and the fire station was across from the cottage.
Right.
You know, it all could. Another thing is that if he had been charged with murder, you know, and they proceeded with that, then he might have exposed the people who dunked him, you know, by keeping that charge down and rearranging your evidence again and playing with words of his responsibility.
So it wasn't
He's
a
a good
murder
boy.
as long as he just drowned,
That's
you see. This is the whole problem.
It couldn't be a murder. That's right.
I mean, that was what it was made out to be.
I think one of the important things to go to is the discrepancy of the car, too. It's an absolute... Mr. Look, why don't you explain...
Oh, the 85 minutes.
Yes, when Mr. Kennedy said he was leaving the cottage, and what happened?
Well, what happened was that his testimony, the senator's testimony, is that he left at 15 minutes after 11 and immediately drove down and drove off the bridge. Now, that means that the accident must have happened about 11:20, maybe 11:25. But it so happens that Christopher Look, who was a deputy sheriff at that time, he's now been elevated to sheriff, by the way,
Everyone moves up.
saw the car at 11:45 at the crossroad where the turn had to be made to the right in order to go down the bridge. Now, there's an hour and 25 minutes in there that is absolutely unaccounted for, and this has never been properly explained.
Well, he not only saw it, but he stopped to see if these people needed help.
It, right.
He recognized the car, and
he recognized it the next morning as soon as it was being
and he
thrown
identified
out.
The license plate number.
He identified it sufficiently so that it was obvious that that was that license plate.
And in the front were two men and a girl.
In the front, he saw two people in front and a something behind. He
Something
didn't know.
behind, yeah, but he saw two.
A shadow affection is what he
Now,
used.
this is way after when the Kennedy accident would have happened.
An hour and 25 minutes.
An hour and 25 minutes, and he identified the car. You see, in reconstructing what could have happened, because people want alternatives, I feel, and I think you do too, that it's possible that he left the party at 11 o'clock, and a person could be behind him and hit him on the head and give him a concussion, take him over in another car to the inn,
Right.
and take care of him.
Right.
Then
Just stand guard right there and be sure he didn't come to.
That's right. Then when they came back to the island, or didn't have to return, because you could use many people in this kind of an ambush kind of accident, this particular vehicle of his is left on the road then, and it was seen later and then thrown into the water.
Right.
Like you say, the windows smashed or just turned over.
It drove itself off.
Drove it. Can you drive it? Is there a way to fix the car that it would go over?
It would seem it would be very simple to secure the wheel with a line, and actually there was the exterior mirror post was one of the bolts was broken on that. There's no reason for that to be broken if it was just a simple going off the bridge into the water, because that was on the upside of the car when it turned.
Well,
so the theory has to be, and let's say one of the simple explanations is to secure the wheel and then accelerate the car, jump out the other side, slam the door, and that's it.
You see it in trick movies or stunts. There's no reason why it can't be done.
Can handle that
all the
very
time.
easily.
Very easy. And then she's in back, asleep and out,
right.
And
unconscious,
and the car goes over and
flips,
and he's over at this particular place and wakes up and says, "What time is it?" and is scared and is in his concussion. He's been hit on the head, and he comes down, identifies himself, goes up, goes down for breakfast, and goes back. And then he is told by the two lawyer men, one of his cousins, in the morning what happened, and then he goes to the police, to see what happened there, and they have to reconstruct this whole story.
He and Markham
reconstruct the whole thing. They're lawyers and cousins, and then they call Burke Marshall, who comes down, and then the U.S. government and the man who locks up the archives, so that we can't have access to the John Kennedy murder.
Yale University.
I think that Burke Marshall has to be his babysitter. I refer to him on the program. Each one has his own babysitter of the intelligence agency or a group that keeps control of what is said or done, and very tight control. Burke Marshall comes down there. And then all the stories are rewound and woven up, just like now the ITT story is being reconstructed, and the new memos found, and all these things. They rewrite the story to fit everything later, and then they get their heads together and go to Hyannisport, and the whole team, who was over there having their conference, the whole gang, wasn't it? Who was
Oh yes, at Squaw Island. Yes.
Yeah, who came over to that meeting?
McNamara and Sorensen are two of the names that occurred to me right away, and Marshall was there. I
Did
can't
Schlesinger
remember.
show up?
I'm not sure about Schlesinger.
Yeah, they had their
That was in time, and I figure
Yeah.
that those people probably are correct.
they had their powwow, and then they decided how it would fit.
Right.
And
and let it loose on Friday night.
and everyone at the cottage, the girls were just simply flown out of town. They're back to their
They
place.
left the ferry, left on the ferry that afternoon, Saturday afternoon.
No questions, no autopsy, no explanation of why the car was seen an hour and a half later.
That didn't come out
Yeah.
for 2 or 3 days.
And Rosemary Keogh's purse was in the car. She didn't drive over with the senator. One of the girls,
No.
Her purse was in the front seat of the car. And the girl who was going back, supposedly to get a rest and go back to the motel early, Mary Capetney, her purse was back at the cottage. Most girls travel with the key to their room and their lipstick and
Usually.
makeup, their personal belongings, and that's back at the cottage. And she's supposed to be leaving there to go across from the island. And the purse of another girl who wasn't in the car, supposedly, was found.
Right.
There was the same mishandling of all the evidence. It wasn't just one item. It was the whole,
There was an awful lot of confusion.
and the confusion of the
It's
testimony
very,
of the
very
people.
difficult to work it all out and try and fit whatever testimony that you consider to be correct into a pattern.
I think it was
It's a
interesting
long time.
that Mr. Peachy, maybe you'd like to read the testimony or just discuss it, the hotel clerk. I think it was very interesting the way Senator Kennedy came down in a very small place, and the man didn't recognize him until he saw him on television as a senator. Bob thinks that there could have been a double.
The story that Kennedy gave, he says, at this time I was very conscious of a throbbing headache, pains in my neck, a strain in my back. But what was even more conscious of is the tragedy and loss of a very devoted friend. Now, did you change your clothing? They're asking about what happened to him after he came back after the accident. This is early in the morning, Saturday. I was unable really to detect the amount of lapse of time, and I wanted to find out, and I put on some dry clothes that were there, a pants and shirt, and I opened the door, and I saw what I believed to be a tourist or someone standing under the light off the balcony and asked what time it was. He mentioned to me, I think, 2:30, and went back into the room. The story that Peachy, the innkeeper, says is entirely different. He indicates that a man came across the deck, walked down the stairs, and initiated the conversation, asking what time it was and about the noise that was going on next door at another party, and then went back upstairs again. And also, Peachy indicated that it was on the Sunday following the senator's Friday night TV appearance. On that Sunday, Peachy had a statement in the paper to the effect that it was not until Friday night that he knew that he was talking to the senator.
He had to see it on the television to know who the guest was.
He figured that because the
Seven-bedroom
senator
man.
mentioned it, that it was perfectly all right for him to mention it, and he had to realize that the senator must have been talking to him.
Yeah.
But he never positively identified the senator as being the person that came down the stairs, initiated the conversation, asked what time it was, which is an entirely different story from what the senator's inquest testimony is.
Yeah, there were so many discrepancies of everyone involved. Particularly all the witnesses in the cabin. We don't have time to go into all those discrepancies. But the thing that's so shocking to me is the handling of the law enforcement agencies when you get prominent people involved in these crimes or when they're murdered. All of a sudden, the efficiency, the law and order team of John Mitchell or J. Edgar Hoover or the local police fall apart. Edward Davis in Los Angeles and the Robert Kennedy murder. I want to go down there and give evidence on the Sirhan family and a conspiracy right after that murder. And they wouldn't listen to it. First they said, you can come down. They said, no, we won't let you. If you weren't in the Ambassador Hotel, we're not taking any testimony. See, we won't go into it. Well, that really limits your audience because then out of the Ambassador Hotel, they limit whether you stood on your right foot or your left foot. And if you were in,
Right.
And then they took the witnesses that stood on their left foot who had red hair. You see, that is the way they eliminated who they wanted to give evidence of what happened in the Ambassador Hotel.
Right.
And, that right away makes you feel that you have to keep going farther into it because you add up the discrepancies and you add up the lack of investigative procedure, and you come out with a conspiracy, in this case to discredit.
I think the best story about how the law enforcement agencies handled a particular case, let's say at Chappaquiddick on Martha's Vineyard, if you could read The Bridge at Chappaquiddick by Jack Olson, it's a very, very clearly done. He did a good lot of research on that.
Yeah.
And it's very clear if you want to find out who was responsible for making the decisions having to do with the senator's charge, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good book, and you have a book coming out on the Chappaquiddick. You're trying to get a publisher now?
If we can find a publisher.
Oh, there's a publisher on
Maybe
the West.
a West Coast publisher would
Yeah.
like it. I don't think the East Coast publishers want to do anything about it.
They won't touch it?
They don't like to do anything about Kennedy. I don't think.
A bookstore in town told me that there's a new book coming out about Ted Kennedy, and it's about his escapades with women and Jones drinking, and of course.
I'm sure this will not be published on the East Coast.
No, but again, it's to discredit any hopes of 72 in case he surfaces and begins to change his mind about.
So then you have to wonder who that publisher is.
Yeah, well, that publisher, he didn't have trouble getting a publisher, and.
You mean the author?
The author, yeah, it's coming out to a big bookstore in town here. They're getting that book.
Everybody likes to read about girls, I guess.
I know. I've asked them to carry serious books. Like Harold Weisberg's book, Frame Up, and Jim Garrison's book. Those books aren't on the stands.
No, I haven't seen them for a while.
No, it's hard to get booksellers.
You mean even on the West Coast?
Yes. It's hard to find truth even on the West Coast.
Yeah.
But they look for it a little more carefully. Jim Garrison's book is in paperback now, and somebody called me. It's at the Thrifty Drugstore. It's great because, you see, the book reviewers tried to put it down. It was a non-existing book. The bookstores wouldn't sell it. It's a well-written book, and the information does come out. So you will find, or you could get it out like you did your last book without a bound book. Can't you do a paperback kind of thing?
Right.
For the Chappaquiddick?
Hopefully. We've written 15 paperback publishers.
Uh-huh.
Just before I left the East Coast, I wrote them.
Yeah.
Hopefully, by the time I get back, maybe I'll have an answer.
And then you get a book out on the Chappaquiddick affair. As I say, being in the West Coast, I had called Denise's office, very early in the case. This was August the 8th. I called them several times.
That's the DA.
Yeah, the DA's office, And I had said fingerprint the car, and then I wanted to know who, if anybody saw Senator Kennedy wet at any time, or wet clothing. And I asked another question, how many doors were there to the cottage? Because I thought it was important. The way that the girls said they were lined up, and that Kennedy sat in front of the house soaking wet and said, "Get me Markham," and I wanted to know who he said that to that came out and got Markham with him. If he didn't come to the house, they didn't see him wet. The fact in the middle of the night and that two people are gone and this girl's left her purse there and hasn't returned, and somebody sits outside and sends for Markham, and then Markham and Gargan leave for a couple hours and supposedly diving in the water and their hair's wet, and they come back and nobody in that little cottage seems any interest or curiosity. Where is Mary? Or
Gargan's supposed to be all bloody from where he scraped himself on the inside of the car, too.
Diving
over
in.
his chest, his arms, and yet the next morning there was no question that he had any wounds or anything.
Nobody
talked about Band-Aids or blood or anything.
Little tiny wooden cottage, and the girls got up, and nobody had any inkling that anybody was dead or hurt or missing.
That's right.
And I wondered, like if any of the people involved in throwing that car over or helping in any way could have gone out of a back door. This is why I wanted to know if there was another door in the
sure
cottage.
There's a back door. There has to be one, because the front door must have led right into the main room. We'll call it the living room. That always, it would be very natural to have a little side door that would come into the kitchen.
Into the kitchen, and somebody could exit out that door and give the car a little push. They may not, but they could. I didn't know who was there, and it's easy to get a team of people to help if you can get so many hundreds into the Dealey Plaza that were part of the thing. You don't need someone actually from the cottage doing it, but because there was so much discrepancy in testimony.
The only reason I don't suspect, I've tried to suspect some of the members of the party, because that's the way you first go at things. Who was right there and who could know more than anybody else, except the people that were right there, is that they would have been then framing themselves, and they would have had to live through the entire thing, and I think it's unnatural, to me anyway, this is my feeling, that they would have framed themselves by asking themselves to go down there and get into a girly situation.
Well, they wouldn't frame themselves if you take a guy, say, who serves the beverages, if that person is responsible for making parties that you want to damage drowsy, like the doctor that gave Otto John, a prominent doctor in Germany, and well known, if he gives him something that makes him drowsy, it later will discredit him. When Dr. Otto John was tried as a traitor, for having gone to the Russian side and then finally escaped and got back to Germany, the doctor would not testify anyway, because then he may be held in a conspiracy trial if he did indeed drug Otto John. But he knew that Reinhard Gehlen or the CIA or Adenauer or anybody else would protect him legally. He isn't endangering himself by administering any beverage because he knows the law enforcement isn't going to prosecute him. He has that guarantee before he gets into it. And it works because he did not have to testify. He said, I won't testify because then I'd be liable to conspiracy charge.
Well, you'd have to look at Crimmins then as being the one that you could. Because he says he went to sleep.
He says he went to sleep and he served the food. But I also, when Ted Kennedy was asked about Mr. Crimmins, he was very vague about John Crimmins. You know, did he usually drive for you? How often? And when did he serve you? What did he do? And his testimony was very vague about his position. He called him a driver. Crimmins called himself a private investigator. And so I had called the East in asking who serves the drinks, because this is interesting. I called back East August the 8th, who serves the drinks. And the inquest wasn't published till what date? How late did that come out?
Oh, that was May.
In May,
the following
May of 70. Okay,
yeah.
August the 8th, 1969, I wanted to know.
That's within 2 weeks of the accident.
That's right.
Right.
I wanted to know, were they drowsy? You know, because I had just finished the research on Otto John. You see, and I can't say there is a parallel, but knowing they're common enemies, you can't afford not to go into it.
Right.
You see, and the fact that they don't makes me more convinced. Then I wondered about the concussion and how he got back to Edgartown. But if he left at 11, it could be hit. These are the things I was asking Denise back on August the 8th.
He wouldn't have anything to do with it, would he?
Well, I had a list of these questions, and when we got to the fourth question, the line was cut. The telephone line was cut. And I never could speak to his secretary or to him at any time.
Well, I called him within the last year, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it.
No, nothing at all. They said, you can't talk about it at all. It's over.
That's right. It's all finished.
It's all finished.
He finished it. It came out in the paper that he finished it, and that's it.
That's right. But that doesn't finish it for you and me.
No, that's just the beginning.
Now, you say the East Coast is pretty quiet about this assassination talk. They don't talk about like we're doing out here. Is there any way to generate an interest in the past political assassinations?
Well, my feeling is, if you want to talk it on the air, you've got to get a hold of the director of the station and get him convinced.
Yeah.
That's a long initiation process.
I'll tell you one thing.
I don't happen to know any people that own stations.
I think there's a very encouraging thing, and this is like interdepartmental fights. This morning they interviewed Spiro Agnew about the remarks in Life magazine that came out regarding President Kennedy.
Yeah.
And Spiro Agnew said that Life magazine he implied they should be out of business, that they should follow the position of Look magazine.
That's very consistent with Vice President, isn't it?
Well, what he said was that because they would carry the Irving story, he didn't go on to say that they canceled the story. Life hasn't published the account of Howard Hughes. They investigated and canceled it. They haven't put the whole book in that they were going to.
Not yet.
They've canceled. So he says anyone who did that, and they haven't done it. I mean, they investigated it because you said it's not right. So he felt they should be out. But you and I know, and when Richard Sprague was out here last week from the East Coast, we talked about a certain member of the staff of Life who quit there because he was doing research on the political assassinations, and they put the lid, don't go any further. And they have a lot of evidence locked up. And what they really do, they hold the power of the presidency of the United States in their files, the photographs. Don't you agree? Life magazine on all of these murders holds all the documentary evidence to prove a conspiracy. And if Spiro Agnew gets mean enough to Life, all they have to do is open the photographic lab. So every day, don't say never. I mean, they could topple Spiro Agnew if they want to. But you see, today he's going to get meaner, and the president's going to get mean. And Life holds the key to their power, and John Connolly's too. And if they want to open those doors,
to show the film.
Then the radio stations in the East like this one, when you have your evidence and documentation, and when it all falls out, you can get on the air back there and explain how it happened, because people will need explanations. They've all been lied to.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you came out to the
Thank you very much for having me, Mae.
And I could meet you. It's good for the researchers to get together.
Okay, thank you, Mae, and Bob Cutler, to identify the voice once again from the East Coast, and Mae Brussell, research specialist from here in Carmel. This has been Dialogue Assassination, and I'm Phil Kogan.
You've been listening to Dialogue. Dialogue is a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.